When we read the Gospels, we're looking at Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And one of the things we'll notice about Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is the reality that it has the Jewishness of Jesus in all four Gospels. However, one of the distinguishing features of the Gospel of Matthew in particular is that it is the most Jewish of the four Gospels. And this can be seen immediately in the very beginning of the Gospel of Matthew by looking at the genealogy in chapter 1, verses 1 to 17. And for us to skip over this genealogy would be to miss out on some very interesting and important ideas that the Gospel of Matthew has for us. So in the Gospel of Matthew, the genealogy has a list of names, which is often considered rather boring in the minds of our modern-day readers. But to the Jewish audience reading the Gospel of Matthew, some things would immediately jump out at them. In particular, some of the anchors in this genealogy. For instance, it starts with Abraham. It continues on to David. And then it reaches to an event rather than a person in the deportation to Babylon. And it concludes dramatically in the Messiah. This would be very important to the Jewish listeners because these are all things very much part of the Jewish narrative. And so it's summarized in Matthew 1:17. So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. From David to the deportation to Babylon, 14 generations. And from the deportation to Babylon to the Messiah, 14 generations. These anchor points would be very significant to the Jewish reader who have trusted in Christ. It begins with Abraham, who is the father of the Jewish people, the patriarch of Genesis, and then goes to the high point of themselves as a nation in the great King David, the heroic David. And then the story proceeds to the lowest point in the Jewish people's history, the exile to Babylon, when the temple was destroyed, when their nation was destroyed, and they were taken away to a faraway place. Most notably described in Psalm 137, verse 1. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. And so it is from this darkest point in the Jewish story comes the idea, the belief, the hope that a Messiah would come. And indeed, that's what the genealogy sets up, that Jesus is indeed the long-awaited Messiah. So the genealogy in Matthew chapter 1, verses 1 to 17, very much anchors the story of Jesus in the Jewish story. As you recall, it covers Abraham to David, to the exile, to the Messiah, from the founding father of their nation, Abraham, to the greatest king they ever had in David, to the darkest hour of exile to Babylon, and to the hope of the Messiah. But what's interesting is that even within this genealogy, which is so rooted in the Jewish narrative, the seeds, the reality, the Messiah belongs for all peoples is in there, which is then explicitly stated in Matthew 28 in the Great Commission when Jesus tells his disciples to bring the good news to all peoples. And so in the next episode, we'll take a look at the genealogy again and see how the seeds of the Messiah for all people are there.